Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give it just 1 minute and we'll start at 12:01. So you can grab a quick cup of coffee. Oh, here we are, 12:01. That was quick. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's Webinar Wednesday. I'm Sigeshni, Head of Marketing at Mint Group, and it's really great to have you with us. Whether you're joining us from the office or home or squeezing this in between meetings, thank you so much for taking time to be here with us. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we begin. Today's session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with your colleagues afterwards. As always, the Q&A is open throughout the session, so please pop your questions into the chat as we go along. So today's topic. AI seems to be showing up everywhere at the moment. Every week there's a new announcement, a new feature, or another colleague saying, I built an agent over the weekend. It's exciting, but it can also get a little chaotic. Different teams start experimenting with different tools. Everyone has their favorite AI app. And before long, you've got 6 co-pilots, 3 chatbots, and nobody's quite sure who's responsible for what. It's a bit like everyone rearranging the office furniture without telling the facilities manager. That's when the conversation starts to change. It's no longer, should we be using AI? Most organizations have actually already answered that question. The question now is, how do we use AI in a way that's secure, governed, and actually ready to scale? Because we all know AI isn't just another app you install and hope for the best. It needs the right guardrails, the right governance, the right foundations, if it's going to create real value for your business. And that's what today's session is about. We're going to unpack what it takes to move from AI experimentation to an enterprise AI strategy your business can trust. We look at governance, security, risk, and the practical steps that help organizations scale AI with confidence. Joining us today are Leandri van der Hoeven and Edward Muller, who work with organizations every day to help them build secure, scalable AI strategies using Microsoft technologies. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Edward.
Thank you, Sigeshni. So I think we can all agree that AI isn't something that's coming to your organization. It's already here, whether you planned for it or not. And it usually shows up in 3 ways within your organization. The first is shadow AI. So your teams are already using AI tools that you don't know about. In fact, about 78% of AI users bring their own AI to work, and that rises to 80% at small and mid-sized firms. And this is happening right now under the radar, or maybe you're even aware of it. And these are users using their own tools like ChatGPT or Claude that sits outside of your organization. The second is fragmented initiatives. So there's multiple AI projects running across different departments. There's no shared ownership, there's no risk oversight, and there's no control over how data is used within your organization. So you have different teams experimenting, developing AI solutions, but it's very fragmented, and the one hand isn't talking to the other. And then third, which ties all of this together, is the governance gap. So most organizations that we see, they've switched on Copilot and other AI tools before they actually built the operating model to govern them safely at scale. So people are already using it within their organization, but they've got no governance around it. So I think we can all agree that AI is already in the building and being used by most of your employees. I think most of us on this call are using AI on a daily basis already. The only question is whether it's working for you or if it's actually exposing your organization and creating additional risk because you don't have the governance in place. If it is used carelessly, it can create exponential risk, and you can't chase one without managing the other. So let's have a look at both sides, and let's start with a positive first, and let's start with the promise. So the upside of AI is measurable, and it shows up in three key places. The first is productivity. So this is normally the win that everyone feels first. When people start using Copilot, they start seeing just how quickly they can get through their work. The work that normally used to eat up your afternoon, mundane work like drafting, summarizing, pulling insights out of a 100-page document, now you can just compress it into minutes, and it doesn't eat up all of your time. And this is also real. This isn't just what people are feeling or seeing within organizations. This has been measured. So when EY rolled out Copilot to 150,000 of their own people, they measured around a 15% productivity lift within their organization. The second is cost efficiency. So you don't just have faster people, but with things like automation and AI agents taking on repetitive multi-step work, you start getting the same output or potentially even better output, but a lot faster. And this frees up your staff to focus on the work that is really important. And then the third is competitive differentiation. And this is where the urgency normally lives. People want to differentiate themselves from their competitors. So more than 90% of the Fortune 500 already runs Microsoft 365 Copilot. So the boardroom question isn't should we anymore, it's how fast can we do this well? So that's a look at the promise. But in getting caught up in that excitement, we tend to skip the other half of the story. And that is the peril. So if you take that same power of AI, but you point it the wrong way, it becomes a real risk for your organization. And these aren't hypothetical risks. We're already seeing these play out in organizations that we talk to on a day-to-day basis. The first one is data leakage, and this is probably the most common one. So an employee is pasting confidential data into a public chatbot. They're using a tool like Copilot, which is not set up correctly within the organization, and that surfaces sensitive files to someone who was never meant to see it. So that data governance hasn't been done before these tools were rolled out. Then there's hallucination, and this is probably the one that we're most used to, or that we've been hearing of from the start of generative AI. And the danger isn't that AI gets things wrong, it's that it gets things wrong convincingly. So if you receive a confident, fabricated answer, it might drive a real decision within your organization, which is extremely risky. The third is compliance and regulatory exposure. So we've got Papaya here at home. There's a GDPR. South Africa is also looking at drafting their own AI policy. We've got the European AI Act. Regulators are actively watching how organizations use this. And in future, you will need to report on how the decisions are made if you are using agents and it is having an effect on your customers, on the decisions that are made for your customers. The fourth is reputational damage, and this is probably the expensive one and the very hard one to revert once it's happened. It takes just one bad AI moment in public to undo years of brand trust in your organization. But none of this is really it's not a reason to avoid AI. We know that it's a very positive tool that people can use. And each one of these items have a known answer of how you can resolve these issues. But here's the uncomfortable parts, and that we see in organizations. So when we talk to organizations, nearly all of them have the same gap. On one hand, they have the tools, they have Copilots, they have other AI solutions and AI agents already in people's hands, but it's often unofficially before anyone actually approved anything or put an AI blueprint in place. On the other hand, they don't have the governance. So there's no clear policy, there's no data controls, they don't have any oversight of this, they don't have any audit trail, so they can't actually see how people are using these tools. And that gap, those using these tools without the proper governance in place, is exactly where all that value quietly turns into a very, very large risk for your organization. So this brings me to probably the single most important idea I want you to take from this, is that trust is not built after AI is deployed. It has to be designed into it from day one. So as you roll out AI, you need to ensure that you have the correct governance in place and all of these blueprints in place already. You can't bolt on trust afterwards once something's already gone wrong. It's already out there then. And I mean, if you feel like this is just your problem, being uncertain around how to govern this, how to implement this safely, is not just your problem. We see this across organization. This is everyone's gap. So across industries, different company sizes, maturity levels, the same pattern always shows up. There's near universal adoption. People are very excited to use these tools and they see the value, but the organization hasn't reacted fast enough and there's no governance in place. And these numbers make it stark. So this is from Microsoft's Work Trend Index. So 75% of knowledge workers are already using AI at work, and most of it is outside any policy. 78% are bringing their own AI tools in, with 80% at small and mid-sized firms, and it's also across every generation. But only about a third, 33%, have actually begun scaling AI across the enterprise. Everyone is stuck in pilots that don't necessarily make it to production, or small teams that are using it, but it's not scaled across the organization. And the fourth one here is what should really get your attention. So 60% of leaders admit that they do not have a plan or a vision to implement AI safely at scale. So the tools are everywhere, but we can see that the governance just isn't. And this leaves us with a real question. How do you actually close that gap and build trust at scale? And that's exactly where our Mint AI frameworks come in play to assist you. And I'm going to hand over to Leandri to take you through that.
Thank you, Edward, and welcome everyone to the session today. So we've seen now the tension that AI creates, the real business opportunity that it has, but it also introduces new forms of risk if it's adopted without structure. So this next section is about the framework and what is needed to move from that excitement into the control. So organizations essentially need that practical way to govern it, enable it, and then scale it responsibly. So we will start with responsible AI as the foundation, and then we'll move into Mint's AI Anchors framework, which turns responsible AI principles into the practical enterprise controls that we have. So from a responsible AI perspective, this is not a compliance label or a once-off policy exercise that we implement in organizations or ask organizations to implement. At its simplest, responsible AI helps organizations reduce the risk, protect their data, build trust, and unlock the sustainable value. Without a structured, responsible AI approach, each team makes its own decisions. That creates the inconsistency, it duplicates effort, and just becomes an unmanaged exposure risk for the organization. So with the right strategy, AI becomes something that the organization can trust, measure, and scale. But to make responsible AI practical, we need to understand the principles behind it. Now, these responsible AI principles is based on the Microsoft responsible AI principles as well, and this is what Mint also employs. So from a security perspective, that means that the AI system must be protected from misuse, data leakage, and manipulation. Privacy means personal and sensitive data must be handled responsibly, collected, used, and retained in the right way. Safety means that AI should operate within clear boundaries and be able to fail gracefully. Note gracefully, if there's ever one like that. Reliability essentially means that users should be able to depend on consistent outputs in expected scenarios. And then transparency means that people should understand when AI is being used, how it influences decisions, and where the limitations to using AI comes in and lies. Accountability is the fact that there must be clear ownership, oversight, and escalation paths available. Fairness and inclusivity remind us that AI must support equitable outcomes and be accessible across the diversity of our user groups. The challenge is that principles alone in this scenario is not enough. So organizations often need a way to operationalize these principles. And this is where the AI anchors framework from Mint comes in. So essentially, each one of these anchors answers quite an important question. So from a data, let's start with the security and control. So from a security and control perspective, it asks, is AI activated safely with the right access, with the right protection and monitoring? Is that even in place for the organization? When it comes to the tenant services, the question becomes, can AI run reliably in your organization's environment? From a governance perspective, and this is the overarching governance, we ask, who approves the AI use? Who owns the decisions? And how are the escalations in your organization handled? When it comes to data governance, the ask is the data AI ready, protected, and is it auditable? From the automation and agent anchors perspective, the question to ask is, how do we automate safely, especially when AI starts taking action across workflows? You have multiple agents running in the organization. You have multiple workflows starting to integrate as well. And then our anchor of change and adoption asks the questions or answer the question, are people trained? Are they confident in using AI? Do they know how to use AI responsibly in their daily work? And together, using each one of these anchors, you create a practical operating model for governing and scaling AI responsibly and effectively in the organization. So next, let's just look at how we put these anchors to work, right? So there's two aspects. The first one is there's a governance aspect, and the other one is there's an adoption aspect. And each one of our anchors fall into each one of these. So on the left, we essentially establish the control. So governance defines the decision forums, approval workflows, and ownership needed to turn policy into enforceable guardrails. Security and control applies zero trust, data loss prevention, and access control, so AI operates within a sanctioned and monitored boundary. So data governance also will ensure that AI draws from data that is classified, protected, and also audit ready. Whereas on our right side, we now start scaling it with confidence. Change and adoption gives people the training, prompting standard, responsible use behaviors, all that is needed for their everyday AI use. Automation and agent will allow AI to move into workflows, but with human oversight and the governance that is then built into that. And then lastly, our tenant services, which ensures the technical environment and rollout model that can effectively support AI safely. So this framework essentially helps organizations with two things at once: control the risk on the one hand and enable adoption on the other hand. So with this framework in mind, we can now look at where an organization can possibly start, and we introduce you to the AI pathways at Mint. So just a very quick open exercise, just thinking about your own organization, and then seeing the questions that are up on the screen right now. Think about where you think your organization could potentially be sitting. Are you curious but unsure? Do you have some use cases that you are ready to launch into an AI experience? Have you done some pilots? Are you at the point of maybe having a few agents in place? You've gone through your pilots, you've scaled, you want to take the next step, or have you potentially started and moved too fast and now you need to just backtrack slight bit and relook at your environment? So I want you to keep these questions in mind. You've identified where your organization possibly could be in your mind, and I want you to keep this in mind because we'll come back to this in a bit. But I'll note that I will dive into the pathways now just for a little bit more context and detail for all of you. There we go. All right, so each of these AI pathways that we have essentially makes the AI journey more practical and easier to act on. So each one of these basically lies on a sliding scale. And to give you an idea, and I'll just quickly give you my laser over here. So we have our first step in our pathway, which is a journey essentially, and that's our established pathway. This comes first, and this is where organizations need the strategy, a little bit of advisory input on their readiness, a little bit of planning before technology decisions gets made. It follows with the activation or the activate pathway when the organization is ready to turn on AI safely with guardrails and training that accompanies that. It then moves into the next pathway of accelerate that supports organization needing to standardize and govern AI across multiple teams, including also their first operational agent. And then our last pathway step is our amplify, which is for mature organizations that need that enterprise strategy. It's a multi-agent governance environment, as well as setting up a center of excellence. And then you will see we have our little fortify over here on the side. And essentially, fortify can happen at any point where, if you are in any of the pathway stages, fortify happens at any step because your AI is already live, but you could potentially need a little bit of remediation, a compliance alignment, or perhaps stronger controls. Essentially, at the end of the day, success is not about rushing to the end. It is about choosing the right entry point for your organization and then following the steps with structure. So let's dive a little bit deeper on each of these. We'll look at who this pathway essentially is for, what does it include, why does it fit a specific level of entry, and what value does it create for your organization. So let's start off with the established package then. So this is essentially organizations with no clear AI strategy. They are unclear about the risk that they are facing, or perhaps some leadership uncertainty about where exactly do they need to begin. So the focus here will be advisory. We assess the readiness, we map the risk, we define the governance blueprint, and then we help you to build that strategic roadmap for the organization. There is no AI activation in this pathway. There are also no tenant changes that will be taking place or any agent implementation. And this is the differentiator. So establish really helps you as a customer to clarify before commitment. Organization also avoid misaligned investments. So instead of buying tools first and then asking governance questions later, with this pathway, leadership now gets a defensible direction upfront. And this is particularly valuable where shadow AI already exists, compliance obligations are unclear, or perhaps some use cases needs prioritization. And the outcome essentially is confident, a clear strategy, understood risk, and a phased adoption roadmap. All right, so once the organization has that clarity, it can now move on to our next step in the pathway. And this is our activate step. This is essentially organizations that are ready to turn AI on safely, but they are concerned about security, data leakage, user behavior, and little or limited governance. The package includes tenant hardening, baseline, data loss prevention, a first version of the AI policy, pilot configuration, as well as champion enablement and prompt training. So the focus here is first activation, not enterprise scaling as of yet, and no retrofitting in this case. That makes this package usable where, as an organization, you really want that early productivity win, but you still need that safe adoption model as well with it. So the value comes from that controlled pilot that we engage and execute, where your users get trained, we get policies in place for you, analytics can be measured, and leadership can see the proof of value before they start scaling. And the outcome is that your AI is live for a controlled group, supported by policies, as well as the enablement. So once your pilot now proves the value, the next challenge you will face as the organization is to start scaling. And this brings us to our accelerate package. So in this is the organization that already has AI in use, but it's currently used inconsistently across various teams. So if in your organization, you might have some departments very strongly using AI, other departments perhaps not so much. This introduces that structure needed for scaling. So a governance forum, role-based enablement, dashboards that you can utilize to monitor. We expand on data classification, and we also introduce the first operational automation agent in the organization based on defined use cases and the immediate need. The differentiator for this pathway now is that it starts bridging the pilots into a scaled production. So it's no longer just training. It is not just having governance documentation in place. It connects your governance, your adoption, and your workflow automation all together. The value here is the measurable scale that it introduces into your organization, where multiple teams can use AI with those consistent standards. Risk and usage now become viable, and the first agent helps prove a work level or a workflow level value in the organization. So you are now moving from interesting pilots to the repeatable operating model, making it part of the everyday way and life in the organization. So from here, your next step essentially will be to treat AI as an enterprise capability. And this brings us to our last pathway step, which is the amplify. And in the amplify, this includes an enterprise-grade AI operating model. Your AI governance now becomes focused on ISO aligned. It is setting up a center of excellence and a body to oversee AI within the organization. And you also possibly will end up having a multi-agent factory, as well as utilizing dashboards in the organization. So with Amplify, this is the only package that is also focused on a full AI center of excellence, policy alignment, and portfolio governance for multiple AI platforms or agents. The value for this pathway now becomes strategic. So you can start reducing operational costs, improve your regulatory alignment, as well as create audit-grade evidence and manage AI as a long-term capability in the organization. The outcome here will be that AI becomes embedded across the organization with a clear ownership structure, ethics oversight, and automated enforcement. So this is now where AI becomes a managed enterprise capability and not just a collection of isolated initiatives. But not, and the reality really in today is that not every organization is building from that clean starting point. I wish everybody was, but unfortunately, most of the organizations that we have worked with have already moved forward, have already implemented some form of AI, and now wants to start stabilizing that environment for themselves. And this is our Fortify pathway that we offer. And in Fortify, it is really where we include a governance retrofit, if you would. It is doing the security due diligence. It is the compliance gap analysis that we offer. We look at the bias and fairness audits. We do model risk assessment and include incident response planning in here as well. So with Fortify, this is basically an intervention package. It is not about building a new AI platform or setting anything up. It is really about adding those missing controls to whatever is already alive and making sure that you are compliant. The value for you here is really the risk reduction. It helps avoid the incidents, reduce the rework, and address the audit findings and protect your previous AI investments as well. Your existing AI now becomes safer, measurable, and governance aligned with a clearer path to control scaling. So now that we've covered all of these pathways, I want to just quickly go back to where we started. So there you can see the visual again about all of these pathways. And what's very important to note here is that these pathways are relatively flexible. It's not really a matter of moving from the one to the next. You can be moving between them. It is not a rigid ladder per se. You might be starting, for example, with establish and then move right into accelerate, or be at accelerate and then move back into activate potentially. So just taking you back to the statements in the beginning, if you can remember some of the questions and if you can remember where you've initially placed your organization, here is just a quick view of potentially likely which pathway would have been suited for the organization based on how you've identified it. So just based on the pathways that I have explained to you, this is where you can just actively see the pathway that could be suitable for you. All right. So now is the point where I will hand back over to Edward.
Thanks, Leandri. Right, so we've seen the framework and the pathways to find your starting points and to assist you through that process. What I want to do in the final few minutes is answer, what does this actually look like for your organization? What does doing this properly actually deliver for the business? And we understand that budget is always a big deciding factor. So how do you actually fund this and what options are available? But let's first start with the business case. So when you approach AI with a structured, governed strategy, it pays off in four distinct and concrete ways. The first is reduced risk. So we've covered quite a lot of these, but if you have governance built in from day one, it's a lot cheaper. It's of course a lot safer than bolting all of this on after you actually have an incident. And that's a number that your organization and that your board really cares about. The second is regulatory compliance. So with all of these regulations like Papaya and GDPR, you need to have this baked into how you deploy and not scrambled together after the fact and added on. As mentioned, there is the South African AI Act that is currently in draft and that they are still working on. So we do know that locally there will also be an act that we need to comply to. So if you don't have this regulation in place from the start, it's going to be very hard to add it on after the fact. The third is lasting trust. So trust with your customers, your staff, and the regulators. It's your license to keep operating. You know, if you lose it once, everything stalls, and it's very hard to get that trust back again. And then the fourth is scalable adoption. So having repeatable governed patterns so that a win in one team can spread across your whole organization instead of dying off as a once-off little POC that some team has worked on. So to make that concrete, here's the difference a strategy actually makes. If we focus on the left first without a strategy, so without one, this is the pattern. You have scattered once-off pilots. You've got shadow AI, people using their own AI tools that you don't have visibility on. And you have duplicated spend as well. You get projects that are stuck at proof of concept and never really go through to production. And you have risks discovered the hard way, you know, when it's too late. And you also have ROI that no one can really point to and that you can't really track. But with a structured strategy, it looks very different. So you've got a clear starting point, a governed, visible rollout. You've got projects that reach production and is actually usable. And your risk is managed upfront and through that whole process. And you actually have ROI that you can measure, and that scales. So the key thing to notice, the gap between these two columns, they're not usually talent, and it isn't budget or technology or anything. It's just the actual structure of how you implement this. So now the good news. You don't have to fund all of this alone. So as a Microsoft partner, Mint can unlock funding that de-risks your investment. And you can think of these as a few power-ups that's worth knowing about. So there's some funding available from Microsoft with no commitment from your side. The first is envisioning and assessment. So these are funded workshops where Mint can assist you to identify your most critical or highest value use case for AI within your organization. And we can then design that out and flesh it out and actually see if it is a valid AI use case for your organization. The second one is deployment accelerators. So these are Copilot and agent rollouts, and these are part funded by Microsoft. So you don't have to pay for all of that. And then there's also POC credits, which again, there's no commitment required from your side. And this is where Microsoft can actually fund your proof of concepts. So this is POC and consumption support. So you can actually test before you scale this out and take it further and take it into production. The last one is specialist funding, and this is generally for fully fledged projects that go into production, and it is larger funding that is available from Microsoft. And this is things like ESA funding. So it's dedicated investment funds for qualifying enterprise projects. So what all of this means is that you almost certainly don't have to start from zero. And we can help you find what your organization qualifies for so that Microsoft can fund some of these AI initiatives within your organization. Okay, so if we pull this all together, there's three things to take away today from all of this. Firstly, govern AI before you scale it. You know, trust needs to be designed in, not bolted on after the fact. You need to look at your governance for your AI implementations and your AI strategy within your organization. Having a strategy is the bridge to real value. So it's what turns your experiments into real outcomes and a return on investment for your organization. And then lastly, let Microsoft help you to fund and accelerate this AI journey. So cost isn't necessarily the thing that is holding you back to run these implementations. All right, so lastly from our side, we do have a QR code on the screen. If you can scan that, and we will also just paste the link in the chat. So that is just for a form to help you identify where you are in your journey. And also if you would like Mint to assist you, and also assist you in unlocking some of that funding potentially to assist you on your AI journey. And I think we'll open it up for some questions. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat, but you can paste it in the chat or Q&A, or if you just like to ask it directly.
Got nothing in the chat so far.
All right, give it a few more seconds. Okay. So if you think about your journey, if you find that you do have some questions, or you would just want to chat to us about it, please feel free to reach out. I'm sure our contact details are on the invite. And that's it from our side. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand it back to Sugeshni, who's going to introduce our next webinar.
Thank you so much, team. I mean, I think one thing that really stood out today is that there isn't a single starting point when it comes to AI. Right at the beginning, we asked you to think about where your organization sits. Maybe you're still figuring out where to start. Maybe you've had success with a few pilots and are ready to scale, or maybe you've moved quickly and are now asking how to strengthen governance and reduce risk. So wherever you placed yourself, today's message is the same. There isn't a right or wrong place to be. What's important is taking the next responsible step. Successful AI adoption needs clear governance, strong security, and the right foundation so organizations can innovate with confidence and scale in a way that the business can trust. Thank you so much, Leandri and Edward, for sharing your expertise. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope you're leaving with a clearer idea of what your next steps look like. But before we let you go, here's a quick look at what's coming up next month. Our August webinar Wednesday is called Connecting the Dots, Why Integrated Microsoft Ecosystems Win. So many organizations are still trying to solve business problems with tools that don't really speak to each other. One team is in one system, another team is in a spreadsheet, someone has built a workaround, and suddenly the business process needs its own project manager. Next month, we'll look at how Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, Power Platform, and Azure can work together as one connected ecosystem. So less duplication, fewer blind spots, better decisions, and hopefully fewer moments of asking, wait, where does that data actually live? If you're looking to get more value from the Microsoft technology you already have, this is definitely a session you won't want to miss. I think Pranesh popped the registration link in the chat, and we'd love to have you join us. Thank you so much once again for spending your time with us today. Have a fantastic afternoon, and we'll see you all at the next webinar Wednesday. Thank you.